Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Keepin' Sporty podcast. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or by visiting our website at keepinitsporty.com. On today's episode, we have a very special guest. He's a Toronto-based broadcaster, podcast host, and elite, I'm telling you folks, elite umpire who, when he's not rooting for the Canadians or making calls on the field, is beloved by his fans and is busy making a splash in the sports industry. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the one and only Elias Drakos. Elias, how's it going?
Oh my goodness. Nathan, I'm doing great. That introduction was great. It sounded familiar for some reason, to me, but
Not sure why it would, but
I'm
okay.
not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure either. But oh man, that was such a great introduction, and I'm doing great today, Nathan.
Oh, glad to hear it. Elias, I know you began preparations for the podcast. Let me check my notes. The Keeping It Sporty podcast. About 2 years ago in April of 2023. So could you tell us a little bit about the journey and how your life has changed about a year and a half, 2 years later?
Sure. Well, okay, preparations. The first episode came out in April of 2023. Preparations began probably around November, December 2022, even when I started with CIUT and I wanted to make a podcast over there. And the whole point was to try and get it on the radio and get it advertised and out there. Worked out a little bit. I had some advertising from them as well, and then kind of just got into it. First season obviously wasn't perfect. There were still things I was testing out, and then got all the way to season 2, and then this year I'm doing season 3. So you're asking how things have changed. Probably the biggest thing was just starting out in season 1, really getting my feet wet, really having guests on that trying to interview people and trying to just get that whole process nailed, and then eventually turning to now we're doing this over Zoom and we're having our cameras on, and then kind of refining my editing skills and things like that. So I think those are the things that have really kind of changed throughout the seasons.
That's terrific. And you can really see it too. So already in your second year of RTA Sports Media and the recipient of the TER Award for the best first year digital project, check his LinkedIn. Um, you've got a bright future ahead, Elias. So I want to ask, how does it feel to be on the other side of the mic today, and what are you looking forward to as you continue your degree?
It certainly feels different being the one interviewed, because obviously usually I'm the one interviewing the other guests. So it definitely feels different, and it feels kind of fun to be on this side of the mic for once, to be honest. Um, what do I see myself wanting to continue with RTA? Just kind of getting the basics of everything down, continuing to develop the podcast in the future, learning how to, do more on air stuff and behind the scenes stuff as well with regards to, all the different crew positions. I think just expanding my horizons overall is the biggest thing I want to continue with the program. So I'm looking forward to continuing it. And yeah, basically just over 2.5 years left. So yeah, time flies.
So it's been three full seasons, 44 episodes. Not sure if you've been keeping track.
Oh, I haven't. That's good math.
44, well, wasn't that hard. Tell us about your favorite episode, what you've learned with each season, and, maybe your favorite guest.
Well, okay, it's so tough, to pick a favorite episode or even a favorite guest. Listen, you're definitely up there, Nathan. I'll give you that. If you're not the top guest I've had on, you're one of the top guests I've had. Right? It's so hard to tell
Oh, thank
because
you.
I value all my guests equally, because they've just anybody who comes on the podcast is helping me out, doing me a favor, coming on the podcast, and in return, I'm hoping to tell a story that many people may not know or may know already, depending on who the guest is. And what have I learned from each season? Just kind of, like I said, refining my skill and my craft, if you will. Trying to just improve with each episode, doing the best I can, prepping, contacting the guest, editing the episode, getting the episode out there. So yeah, I want to continue doing that in the future, and we'll see how it goes.
Fantastic. So you've been able to cover and record and sort of, be in the moment as these things happen, a number of great moments over your three seasons with some big guests. That includes local celebrity Billy Capianis, media personality Renaud Lavoie, Ottawa Charge GM Mike Hirschfeld, and sports producer Dave Stipp, as well as a number of other really esteemed guests. So can you tell us about the process you take for every podcast episode, what it's like booking guests, and maybe anything else behind the scene that your audience might not be able to see?
Sure. I mean, booking guests, usually I thought it would be a little bit more difficult than it actually is, to be honest. I mean, usually the way I reach out to guests is via email, sometimes via Instagram DM if I don't have the email available. And honestly, most people are nice and they're going to respond. And, most of the time people are up to do an interview if they have the time. So I think that's kind of the beginning of the whole process. The next thing is booking a time that works for both myself and the interviewer. Obviously, a little easier in the summertime when I have a little more time during school, a little bit tougher because sometimes they're free only certain times and I'm free during other times. And then basically, I have them. I have to prepare the episode first of all, do some research into the guest, which takes some time. I have them on the show. I edit the episode and then it gets uploaded to Spotify and Apple and YouTube and the website and whatnot. So, I mean, that's kind of the process in a nutshell, more or less, or a simplified version of it. And kind of behind the scenes moments, I mean, sometimes it's gonna take a while to get an episode to like record an episode. Sometimes it takes a few weeks to get a guest on. Sometimes the guest has to reschedule, or in the rare case, I would have to reschedule whenever the episode would be. So I mean, just kind of staying patient with that. And sometimes, guests have to reschedule one time, two times. I've even had up to four times that certain guests have to reschedule because their schedules are so busy. So I mean, that's kind of something I feel like that people don't see behind the scenes very often is how often you may have to how many different times you have to be available to do these episodes. But most guests are good like that, and they come on and they provide their insight. And I've been very fortunate to have so many esteemed guests, as you said, um, so far with the Keeping It Sporty podcast.
Well, that's terrific. And I want to ask, have you ever been intimidated by a guest? Probably not me, but maybe someone else.
Definitely you. No, well, I mean, it's interesting because intimidated may not be how I would describe it, but more so sometimes you can get a little bit stressed, a little bit nervous or nerve-wracking, these feelings that you experience beforehand. But I find the way to kind of negate those feelings is through preparation. And if you're prepared and you know what you're talking about before the guest comes on and you've kind of rehearsed it once, twice, three times, you're going to feel more confident when you're doing the episode. So I think that's the biggest thing to kind of not feeling like that before an episode.
That's a really great attitude toward it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
So, looking back on some of the moments you've been able to cover since you started the podcast, there have been some really memorable ones that, especially within the Canadian context, but just sports in general, are going to stick for a really long time. They're really memorable moments. That includes the Oilers' near comeback in June of this year, Otani watch, the Oakland A's situation, the Blue Jays wildcard madness, the Leafs playoff runs, a bunch of those really memorable things that you've had the chance to record and cover as they happened. So just looking back on 3 seasons, what are some moments that you've covered that really stand out to you, especially now?
Well, I mean, the Otani one, now that you bring it up, was a big one. And obviously you were a part of that panel, Nathan, as well. So you remember how big that was, watching Otani's, the plane watch and is Otani going to come here? And then it was confirmed and then it was not confirmed. And for that one, I mean, it was a big moment because that one I really had to get a panel kind of ready quickly on the fly because that was something that was happening that day. And then obviously in the evening I recorded with, yourself and a couple other guests, obviously. So that was definitely a big moment. The Blue Jays wildcard situation was a big moment as well. Obviously, that was a difficult one to break down. And that one was in studio at CAUT back then as well, that you and I went down, Nathan, to record together, which was a lot of fun. And obviously, there's so many big moments, right? The Leaf playoff runs and all that, but also just having, certain people on, them telling their stories as well. I feel like those often get overlooked, and that's kind of what I want to highlight with the podcast as well. Besides all these big moments that happen that people know about, is the stories that go untold sometimes. So I feel like, every interview is huge and every interview has its big moments.
So, Elias, beyond hosting the podcast and being at Sports Media Team U, you managed to get some other experience in sports, working at the Six Hockey and of course, umpiring together. And we do that together, which is always fun. But tell me sort of what working in sports through so many different perspectives is like.
It's interesting. I mean, umpiring in specific, it kind of gives you more of a deep appreciation for officials and referees and umpires because you get to see that side of things. If the referee makes a bad call, I know, well, you know what? It's happening in real time. It's a tough thing to tell. Everyone makes bad calls from time to time, and sometimes they're in the biggest moments and the biggest situations, but you have to learn that that's part of the game, right? So I feel like that kind of gives me more of an appreciation for officials overall. Working at the six hockey, I mean, it was also interesting because it gave me kind of a perspective on all these other things that you have to do for a podcast and working with a team to get everything done. So I think that that kind of showed me more of the collaboration side, whereas my podcast is more so just me hosting a guest or an amount of guests, right? So I feel like working at the six hockey has helped me kind of, yeah, work on my also collaborating skills as well and kind of give me a new perspective on things.
Fantastic. And there's such a wide breadth of sports too you've been able to cover through that hockey, baseball, which must be really valuable, I'm sure.
Yeah,
So,
it is. Yeah.
yeah. So, is there any other medium on that topic that you're dying to try next? Maybe beyond the podcast, you're thinking about writing, radio, a playing career. It's not too late. I know you can swing the bat.
Yeah, I don't know about a playing career at this point, Nathan, but writing has always been interesting to me as well. I mean, aside from just podcasting and obviously broadcasting as well, which I enjoy, but writing, I mean, I'm taking a sport journalism class, which is a mandatory part of my program. I've really enjoyed that as well. So I think, if I were to pursue anything else aside from podcasting, maybe that would be it, going to write for a team or just write in general. There's so many different angles that you can use in writing. So I think that's definitely something that's interested me as well.
That's terrific. Well, Elias, it's that time in the interview, I'm afraid. Before I let you go, I want to ask, after 3 excellent seasons, are there any stories or things you're just dying to tell the fans that they might not already know after 44 episodes? Let's hear it.
Gosh, you really made me kind of pull some memories out of the bag for this one. I mean, okay, let's see here. I had Matthew Shinetti on from TSN reporter, which I was very happy to get him on, and I was very thankful that he was willing to do the interview with me. Some little podcast, and here I am, and I have a TSN reporter on. But that one, we ended up going for so long that the Zoom timer ran out, and he was kind of mid-sentence, and then I ended up I over Instagram DMing him saying sorry about that, the timer ended, and he was nice enough to actually take the time to hop on another Zoom meeting for like 5 minutes and kind of conclude the interview. So I mean, some people could have just said, or most people probably would have just said, "No, I'm busy, sorry," and I would have accepted it and said thank you. But the fact that he was willing to come on again for another 5 minutes, take the time to just finish out what we were talking about, I thought was really nice of him. So I mean, that one, that definitely stands out to me, and it shows me, it's just people are nice, right? Like to have faith in humanity, right? Even though sometimes that can be a little bit difficult. Um, but yeah, he's definitely a good person for doing that. So thank you again, Matthew, for doing that.
That's a great story. It really talks to sort of the atmosphere around your podcast and around this sort of sports discussion, and it's really terrific to hear, Elias.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
So, pressure off. How was the audition?
Okay. Oh, pressure off of you, you mean? Okay, well, you
Yeah,
know
no,
what? I thought you meant off me for a second. You know what? That was great, Nathan. I think that you definitely have to come on more often and host. And maybe this was a part of your plan. I mean, last episode we co-hosted Mr. Hirschfeld together, and now you're hosting me on your own. So I mean, maybe this is the kind of transition. Get
can I
Elias out of here.
can I take your job now? I've been watching, for years now. I mean,
There's always room for a co-host. I definitely don't mind.
maybe a Blue Jays podcast next summer, eh?
You never know. You never know.
But in all seriousness, thanks so much for coming on, Elias. The Keepin' It Sporty podcast really is so appreciative to have a guest like you on to tell you about 3 seasons hosting the Keepin' It Sporty podcast. So it's been a pleasure. Good luck the rest of the way. And that concludes this episode of the Keepin' It Sporty podcast. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple, and at our website, keepinitsporty.com.